Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Curtis Kelly. I represent Thurgood Marshall Academy here in the District of Columbia. Thank you, Vice President, Madam Secretary, for having myself and Greg Baldwin, who represent Thurgood Marshall. My tragedy started September the 20th of last year. I have two twin sons that attend Thurgood Marshall, and they are elite athletes, Junior Olympics. One of my sons was a youth council member for the District of Columbia in Ward 5, and one day this is after school. Now I agree we need to protect our kids in schools, but we need to protect them on their safe passageways home as well, and their extracurricular activities, and their parks and recreations and everything that they try to go for their peace. And so my son Zaire Kelly went to College Bound right after school to announce that he was declaring for his college to run track and to further his education and become mayor of District of Columbia or something like that. On his route home, he got a text from my son Zion Kelly, who was going to make it, but when he found out there was press, he decided not to, because locally we were burnt by the press. Zion is texting Zaire, watch out, there's someone in our passageway coming home. And in a split second, Zaire was just walking home, maybe from this distance to where the curtains are. He was that close to home when a thug came out to try to rob Zion, and he tried to rob Zaire. He tried to rob Zion 20 minutes earlier. Came back because he was upset. He didn't get them students, those fast track kids. I'm going to come back and get them. He went, caught my son, got an altercation over a cell phone, shot my son in the head, and now he's not here with us. That day I could have lost two sons, but the tragedy that my family have to live with after losing Zaire is I have another son that attends Thurgood Marshall. We've been taking him to all types of family counseling and therapy, and the school has been affected, the community has been affected, and the local politicians said, so what we want to do is stand up for our students in the community. Give us some solutions as to what we can do. So myself, along with Helping Hands Inc. DC, came together and got with our attorneys and everyone else and said, okay, we're going to do some research and find out what legislation can be found that can better serve to protect our students in their safety zones and their school zones. And it's been a fight because everybody show up for photo ops. All the politicians show up to say, we're going to get it done. We're going to protect our kids. But just a couple weeks later, school shooting, just like we all hearing about all these experiences at Ballou Senior High School, kid gets shot at school. Dunbar, kid gets shot at school. In our schools, on their safe passageway home, their parks and recreations, extracurricular, our students have to be protected. Our students have to be protected. One local legislator asked me, how do you define students? How would a criminal define students? You would define them after you commit a crime against them. The students are crying. They're calling for a national standout day, April the 20th, in celebration of Columbine, because the same incidences keep happening, not just in our schools, in our communities as well, to upstanding citizens, to those that's doing the right thing. And we as parents, yes, we try to fight to pass legislation just like you, locally. But nationally, this campaign has grown, and it's affecting all of us, all our kids. It's gun violence. Gun violence. So I thank you. That's my story. And we're going to keep fighting, and we're going to keep trying to pass legislation, and we're going to keep fighting for our students at Thurgood Marshall and here in the District of Columbia and across America as well.
Thank you very much. It's incredible. Very sad. Thank you very much. Does anybody have an idea for a solution to the school shooting and the school shootings that we've gone through over the years, and we've seen too much of it, and we're going to stop it. And there are a lot of different ideas. I could name 10 of them right now. Does anybody have an idea as to how to stop it? What is your recommendation to stop it? Yes.
I don't know if I'm going to say something you haven't already heard. I could tell you that in addition to all of the sorrow that we're feeling in our community right now, there's also a lot of anger. Anger that the police can visit a person dozens of times and not take action. Anger that the FBI could get at least 2 credible tips and not take action. And one possible solution, which we discussed with Secretary DeVos over lunch, was if a tragedy strikes, can we wait for the first responders to get to the campus 4 or 5, 6 or 7 minutes later? And one possible solution, which may not be very popular, would be to have people in the school, teachers, administrators, who have volunteered to have a firearm safely locked in the classroom, who are given training throughout the year. There are plenty of teachers that are already licensed to carry firearms. Have them raise their hands to volunteer for the training, and when something like this starts, the first responders are already on campus. And if it's not the teachers, you could have people that work on the campus. A custodian could be an undercover policeman. Someone who works in the library or the lunchroom could be an undercover policeman. He serves lunch every day, but he also has a firearm at the ready. A guidance counselor. If you can't stop it from happening, and with hundreds of millions of guns out there, I don't know if it'll ever be fully stopped, but the challenge becomes, once it starts, to end it as quickly as possible. And just, unfortunately, you can't wait 5 or 6 or 7 minutes. And what my daughter said earlier, that there are 32 states that have laws that require the schools to prepare for this. And yet more than half the county, and Broward County is one of them, and our school was prepared. And thank God it was only 17 lives. But when more than half of the counties won't spend the money out of their budget for the training, even though the law says they should, it'll be that many more the next time. So between having the schools train for lockdowns and possibly having armed personnel, staff that are willing to do it, anonymously. I don't want the kids to know who have the firearms. I don't want the shooters to know who have the firearms. I don't want people walking around with firearms on their side. But when that alert goes off and they put the kids in the closets and they put the kids under the desks, then I want the teacher to open that safe, pull out that firearm, and be ready to do what needs to be done while you're waiting for the helicopters and the SWAT teams to come.
I'll disagree with that, but I also think that you need more deputies. You have a campus of Stoneman Douglas with, I think, about 3,200 with one deputy. One. And if that deputy leaves for a training, we need another deputy there.
Yeah.
And the other thing is communication. The schools have to communicate with the police. The police has to communicate with child services. Child services, maybe has to communicate with FBI prison. And for someone to buy a gun at 18, to do, I understand, like even a background in 15 minutes, you should be able to communicate with all of those other people that something is wrong and this child doesn't belong buying a gun like this. Or
Mr. President.
You're right about that. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Vice President, Madam Secretary, thank you for having us. I think what you're hearing today is there's no lack of solutions. I think what we've had to date is a lack of leadership. And I have confidence that you will bring out that leadership that we need to finally take the action that needs to be taken, because there's not one solution. There's many solutions, and you're hearing some of those here today to resolve this, to address this. Our schools are soft targets, so we need to harden the targets by making them, increase our deterrence capability so that potential murderer knows that that's not going to happen, that there's going to be people there ready to respond, that the minute something happens, our technology will go up, that an incident has occurred, and it will be responded to immediately. And also the children and the teachers know what to do in that instance. They're communicated with effectively. You know, we need to identify where there's mental health issues among the student population. The kids at the school knew this person. They knew he was an issue. The FBI knew, and I think we need to close some of these loopholes in the background check system where we're not integrating effectively the mental health knowledge that exists at the state level, at the local level, into the federal background check system. So fix the NICS system, and that's an easy one. So there's a lot of immediate steps we can take right now. There's some longer-term solutions, but I think we need to get started right away, and I thank you for your help on this.
Well, thank you, Joe. And I will say again, background checks are going to be very strong. We need that. And then after we do that, when we see there's trouble, we have to nab them. You know, years ago we had mental hospitals, mental institutions. We had a lot of them, and a lot of them have closed. They've closed. Some people thought it was a stigma. Some people thought, frankly, it was, the legislators thought it was too expensive. Today, if you catch somebody, they don't know what to do with him. He hasn't committed the crime, but he may very well. And there's no mental institution. There's no place to bring him. And we have that a lot. Even if they caught this person, I'm being nice when I use the word person, they probably wouldn't have known what to do. They're not going to put them in jail, and yet, so there's no that middle ground of having that institution where you had trained people that could handle it and do something about it and find out how sick he really is, because he is a sick guy, and he should have been nabbed a number of times, frankly. Your concept and your idea about it's called concealed carry, and it only works where you have people very adept at using firearms, of which you have many. And it would be teachers and coaches. If the coach had a firearm in his locker when he ran at this guy, that coach was very brave. Saved a lot of lives, I suspect. But if he had a firearm, he wouldn't have had a run. He would have shot, and that would have been the end of it. And this would only be, obviously, for people that are very adept at handling a gun. And it would be, it's called concealed carry, where a teacher would have a concealed gun on them. They'd go for special training, and they would be there, and you would no longer have a gun-free zone. Gun-free zone to a maniac, because they're all cowards. A gun-free zone is let's go in and let's attack, because bullets aren't coming back at us. And if you do this, and a lot of people are talking about it, and it's certainly a point that we'll discuss, but concealed carry for teachers and for people of talent, of that type of talent. So let's say you had 20% of your teaching force, because that's pretty much the number. And you said it, an attack has lasted, on average, about 3 minutes. It takes 5 to 8 minutes for responders, for the police to come in. So the attack is over. If you had a teacher who was adept at firearms, they could very well end the attack very quickly. And the good thing about a suggestion like that, and we're going to be looking at it very strongly, and I think a lot of people are going to be opposed to it. I think a lot of people are going to like it. But the good thing is that you'll have a lot of people with that. You know, you can't have 100 security guards in Stoneman Douglas. That's a big school. It's a massive school with a lot of acreage to cover, a lot of floor area. And so that would be certainly a situation that is being discussed a lot by a lot of people. You'd have a lot of people that'd be armed, that'd be ready. They're professionals. They may be Marines that left the Marines, left the Army, left the Air Force, and they're very adept at doing that. You'd have a lot of them, and they'd be spread evenly throughout the school. So another thing, I really believe that if these cowards knew that the school was well guarded from the standpoint of having pretty much professionals with great training, I think they wouldn't go into the school to start off with. I think it could very well solve your problem. So we'll be doing the background checks. We'll be doing a lot of different things, but we'll certainly be looking at ideas like that. A lot of people don't understand that airline pilots now, a lot of them carry guns. And I have to say that things have changed a lot. People aren't attacking the way they would routinely attack. And maybe you have the same situation in schools. So does anybody like that idea here? Does anybody like it? Right? Yes? For Meadow, your beautiful Meadow. We talked about that. And do people feel strongly against it? Anybody? Anybody? Strongly against it? All right. I mean, look, we can understand both sides of it. And certainly it's controversial, but we'll study that along with many other ideas. Anybody else something to say? Yes, go ahead.
I've been in thousands of schools across America, and I've noticed in Israel they have one hard entry point, and it's very well guarded. I'm not asking for us to change. I'm not saying that we should turn our schools into prisons, but I've been in so many schools where I'm speaking in an auditorium, and I'll go outside to call my wife or to just get a breath of fresh air. And it is so easy for me to get back into that school. I'm an unknown adult to many of those students. I can tap on a window and they'll open the door for me. Or I can catch someone coming out the side door and easily get in. So one of the things that I have thought a lot about in seeing this around the country is we have really soft entry points.
Right, that's true. That's true. And we can do something about that. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Brandon Thompson. First, my heart goes out to everyone who's experiencing this tragedy right now. I'm currently Dean of Students at Friendship Tech Prep, which is in the heart of Southeast D.C., which is in Ward 8, which is one of the most impoverished wards in D.C. However, at our school, just a solution, we actually have checkpoints. When a student walks in the door, we actually have metal detectors. And I oftentimes see that in urban education. And we actually have an X-ray machine that students put their bags through. And right after this incident happened, a parent who didn't so much agree with it at first sent me an email saying, thank you, because now I see exactly what's happening. And so we oftentimes use that TSA model. When the student comes in, we have somebody at the door to greet them, to do a check-in just to see how they feel. And we have certain point people where I know this person's not feeling so well, so they won't get past point one. They go through the metal detector. Their bag go through the machine. And so at the end of the day, just talking to my students riding over today, they all say, well, I feel safe. And you come outside and you say, talk about mental hospitals. Our school is right across the street from a shut-down mental hospital. We have, if you were to come over to the streets, you'd be like, oh, my God. But once you get inside the building, we have that family feel. We have those check-in points. We have it where every visitor that comes through our building has to go through these checkpoints to ensure that our students get home safe, to ensure that our staff members get home safe. And these are just minor solutions. Like, I will say, I'm against having a teacher with a gun in a building. Teachers are emotional. People are emotional. So I think that is a huge factor. However, but having students, and you may have to go to staff members going through these checkpoints to ensure that, one, their mental is on point, and two, that we're talking about they don't have any physical metal on them, or even in our building, our students don't even carry cell phones because we consider that's a threat. It's taken away from them learning. So they actually turn in their cell phones. And so those things of ensuring our kids are there at the moment and live the moment to enjoy school, they get that joy factor, they get that family feel, and they're able now to connect with one another and able to communicate and not have to worry about looking over their shoulder when they walk, out and into the building, because they know every person that comes through the building has been through a metal check. Their bags have been checked. And so that's just a solution. Once again, my heart goes out to everyone who's been through this tragedy.
Thank you. Very well said. Very well said.
Mr. President, thank you for being open to hearing all forms of solutions. I truly appreciate that. one point on the mental health issue, and I think it's important to note that someone with a mental illness is highly unlikely to ever commit an act of violence. It's a very, very small percentage. What we're really dealing here is more with a lack of mental wellness. This is around anger and fear. And that's not something that you can diagnose and put in mental health hospitals. This is more about funding for mental health services to help these individuals that are at risk, especially when we think about suicide. Teen suicide. Suicide is the #2 killer of our children, as I understand right now, and a lot of these suicides are performed with firearms, which makes them unsavable. So the idea of mental health and being able to identify who's at risk, who is considering these issues, who's going into crisis, that is incredibly important. I appreciate the point on arming teachers. It's not personally something that I support. Rather than arm them with a firearm, I would rather arm them with the knowledge of how to prevent these acts from happening in the first place. How do you identify the kids in your class that are most at risk? And then, most importantly, within a school, how do we have a safety assessment program so that schools know how to deal with all these threats, have established protocols to deal with them, and get underneath the surface of what's going on in that child's life, find out why they're on this pathway behavior, and intervene. This is about prevention. There are some fabulous solutions being talked about today which still go to imminent danger. Let's talk about prevention. There is so much that we can do to help people before it reaches that point. And I urge you, please, stay focused on that as well. It is the gun, it's the person behind the gun, and it's about helping people before they ever reach that point.
Yes, good.
So,
Thank you.
thank you. I fully respect all of our amendments, including the second. But in Maryland, they have proven that the Second Amendment does not protect these types of weapons. They have banned over 45 different kinds of assault weapons, including the AR. They have banned they have limited magazine sizes. They have proven that it's not like we have to lose our Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, I believe, was for defense. And I fully respect that, like I said. But these are not weapons of defense. These are weapons of war. And I still can't fathom that I myself am able to purchase one. Anyone?
I would like to talk, Mr. President. I couldn't agree. I'm not here to debate, but I lost my sister. And like Mr. President said, if you could find 20% of maybe retired law enforcement officers or teachers who could go through discrete training to carry a firearm on this waist, it could have been a very different situation. Like he said, law enforcement takes them 7 minutes, 8 minutes to get there. If a teacher or a security guard has a concealed license and a firearm on their waist, they're able to easily stop the situation. Or the bad guy, I'll put it that way, would not even go near the school knowing that someone can fight back against him. Also, I believe that is insanity that they would even open the gates up 20 minutes before school ends. They're supposed to protect us and the children. So in the future, we need more security. We need more firearms on campus. We need better background checks. And we need to study more on mental health. And I want to thank everyone for their condolences, and that's my only argument. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, good.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, Madam Secretary, for having us here. My deepest condolences to those who have lost family and friends. My name is Curtis Lawrence. I'm principal at Friendship Collegiate Academy. And like Mr. Brandon had said, we have security, and we also have MPD on staff that we hired to make sure that things aren't coming into our school. And also this immediately in the mornings and during dismissal, immediately around the school to protect our kids as they leave. But last month we did suffer a loss. One of our 9th graders was gunned down walking distance from the school. And so when we talk about safe passage, I think in looking at what's happening with gun violence with our scholars and with our students, I'm saying taking a double approach, right? You have to protect kids that are in school. All right, so as a president, you have different laws in different states. And so definitely where they don't have the necessary security as we may have getting in, then we have to think of what are those solutions for the kids in Florida that are going to those schools with that to make sure that they're safe in school. And then places like here in D.C., what are those solutions to make sure kids are able to get home and to school safely? So I think it's a two-pronged approach, and I know you're in a specific position to, as you meet with the governors and they have their different laws and coming from these different perspectives, to make them own that two-pronged approach to protect them in school and protect them as well out of school going back and forth.
President, thank you so much, and thank you, Vice President and Madam Secretary, for convening this and for allowing us all the opportunity to speak about this very serious problem. And my heart absolutely breaks for the families of Parkland. I have a sense of what you are going through now. I've been going through it for 5 years. This is my son, Daniel. He was 7 years old when he was shot to death in his first grade classroom in Sandy Hook Elementary School, just a little over 5 years ago. My wife, Jackie, could not be here today because she's a school teacher, and she takes that job seriously and sent me as the ambassador. Jackie is a career educator, and she will tell you she has spent over a decade in the Bronx. And she will tell you that school teachers have more than enough responsibilities right now than to have the awesome responsibility of lethal force to take a life. Thank you. Nobody wants to see a shootout in a school, and a deranged sociopath on his way to commit an act of murder in a school with the outcome, knowing the outcome is going to be suicide, is not going to care if there's somebody there with a gun. That's their plan anyway. I am going to build on what my friend and colleague, Nicole Hockley, said. We tried this legislative approach. I've been in this building before, many times, wringing our hands, pleading with legislators, what can we do? Until we finally said, we have to go home and do this ourselves. And we built something. Sandy Hook Promise has built something that works. We train students, and we train teachers, and we train educators with the tools how to recognize these people, and with the tools of how to intervene, and with the tools to get them to the help that they need before they pick up a gun or any other weapon and commit a horrible tragedy. It works. We don't charge for it. We're not asking for money. We've already stopped school shootings. We've already prevented suicides. We've already captured other social issues like bullying and cutting. We know that it works. We have a solution right here. We're asking for you to please help. We need to do this nationally, now. Thank you.
Mr. President, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you and the Vice President, and to thank everyone here for joining us today, for telling your stories, for sharing your perspectives, and please know that this is the beginning of a long conversation. We are committed to seeing a solution to this very, very tragic and horrible situation, and so know that our hearts will continue to be with all of the families affected here. And thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you, Betsy, and thank you, Mike, and thank you, everybody, for being with us. We're going to work very hard. It's very difficult, it's very complex, but we're going to find a solution. We have been looking at this issue for a long time, too long as far as I'm concerned, and you'll be back in a much more positive light. We will get there. If you have any suggestions, if you have any feelings as to what we should do, because there are many different ideas. Some, I guess, are good, some aren't good, some are very stringent, as you understand, and a lot of people think they work, and some are less so. But in addition to everything else, in addition to what we're going to do about background checks, we're going to go very strong into age, it's age of purchase, and we're also going to go very strong into the mental health aspect of what's going on. Because here was a case where it cried out, this person was sick, very sick, and people knew he was very sick. And I know law enforcement's also, I think, really learned a lot from this event. We're also going to look at the institutions. We're going to look at what you do when you find somebody like this, because again, right now we're not equipped like we were many years ago. So we're going to look at that whole aspect of what's going on. I want to thank everybody. I know you've been through a lot. Most of you have been through a lot more than you ever thought possible, more than you ever thought humanly possible. And all I can say is that we're fighting hard for you, and we will not stop. We will not stop. We're going to get there, and I just grieve for you. I feel so, it's just, to me, it could be nothing worse than what you've gone through. Again, thank you for your ideas. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for pouring out your hearts, because the world is watching, and we're going to come up with a solution. God bless you all. Thank you.
All right, you've been watching President Trump host an unprecedented and extraordinary roundtable on school violence and the shootings. Many people there in attendance had either been at a school shooting or they lost their loved ones in the school shooting. One of the great powers of the presidency is the power to convene. And this is something we have not seen before, especially on this issue, where you had such raw emotion, outpourings of grief, the president listening super intently to all of them, asking about ideas. It was a very emotional and moving day, but it also gave you some hope that there could be some achievement going forward. The president said he's going to have them back and that they would be coming back and in a much better light, meaning that hopefully that their grief would hopefully subside because the government, the president says, is going to act. We're going to take it around the table here, and Jesse Waters, I'll start with you for your thoughts.
America's reached a tipping point on school violence. Some of us were tearing up watching the exchanges. It was a really raw and organic and powerful moment. The president, we know, takes in information verbally. That's how he takes his briefings. You know, he was very impacted when he saw the pictures of the Syrian children gassed. And this was, I think, a moment for him to really take it all in and listen. He talks about being a protector, protecting the border, protecting jobs, and it's now up to him to do whatever he can to protect the schools. And a lot of politicians are all talk and no action, and he's not one of them, I believe, but he wants to take action that's going to have an impact, not just empty action that's not going to solve any problems. He talked about making America great again, but when I interviewed him, he talked about making America safe again. And one of the things that needs to be addressed is school safety. The best moment, I believe, Andrew Pollack, who stood up, I believe he lost his daughter Meadow, said, forget about the gun issue right now. Let's focus first on making schools safe. And there were some great exchanges of ideas, arming teachers at schools, mental institutions, enhanced background checks. I mean, this kid's been suspended how many times? No one really intervened. My father ran a school out in Long Island, and after Sandy Hook, they built fences around the school because you can't have people just wandering into a school. A lot of the teachers and administrators from some of the urban areas, they have metal detectors and checkpoints, which are extremely effective. So that's something to look at, too. And another great moment I thought was when a guy, I believe from Sandy Hook, one of the fathers said, we stopped relying on Washington to fix everything, and we did it ourselves. And we really trained teachers to intervene when they saw a student with problems and then take action aggressively. The best moment, I think, though, too, at the end, the guy just said, listen, we've lost our connections as humans, as Americans. We don't recognize people anymore. We don't see things. We miss signs. And that's the bottom line. When you see something, say something. Americans, we're all one nation, and you just have to care for one another. And I think this is really a starting point for some strong action.
The president talked about, Greg, some concrete things that obviously he's thinking about. One, it was the age at which you can buy a gun that's set federally. He talked about background checks, concealed carry. He mentioned it several times, and that would be people in a school that would have a gun, but you wouldn't know who that might be.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing for me, not just the suggestions, but the tone and tenor of this conversation is incredibly important because, we make jokes about the president viewing his administration as a talk show. Well, so what? That was one hell of a talk show because you got a bunch of different opinions and a bunch of people sitting there who know the topic and know the topic intimately and expressed suggestions, practical solutions about a horrible problem. And my advice always stands. The biggest obstacle in this debate is trust. The loudest voices do not trust each other. Those were not the loudest voices. Those were the voices that you had to listen to. And what you found there were people who disagreed, but they disagreed civilly. And I was just moved. I thought that this is probably one of the most valuable things I've seen in this administration. I also, to Jesse's point, the thing that got to me was the Daryl Scott talk. His daughter died in Columbine. He's
just recently.
Daryl Scott.
I'm sorry, he started the Rachel's Promise.
His point was about connection, and what we saw there was connection. We're too busy in this world of division right now, and what group do you belong to, and the tribalism that infects everything from politics to identity. And what he was trying to say is, we need to connect. We connect in broadband. That's not the real thing. We have community, and the thing is, community means interaction between police and the people they police. It's a community. It's at sporting events. It's at schools. People need to know who's in their community and need to be confident enough. And I think that there was a binder full of practical solutions there that can be acted upon, and they were presented in a way that was non-threatening to either side. And that's what communication and connection is about.
Actually, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but we do have the soundbite from Daryl Scott in case you didn't hear it earlier. Let's listen.
I just want to share one simple principle with you that we've learned over the years as we've worked with millions and millions of young people. And it comes from something you said last week in your speech, and it was that we must create a culture of connectedness. We must create a culture in which our classmates become our friends. Every single one of these school shootings have been from young men who are disconnected. And we talk a lot about the mental health issues, but it actually goes deeper than that because there's a lot of mentally ill children that are kind and compassionate. The focus really needs to be on how can we connect.
I think that was powerful for a lot of people. Greg brought that up. We wanted to play that soundbite for you, and Juan will get your reaction.
So I think today was a wonderful day in terms of people hearing voices. Earlier today, you had the students from Parkland who went to Tallahassee to the state capitol in Florida. They're arguing there that, again, we need action. They're tired of the status quo. And it was an amazing turnout. In fact, I was struck by the idea that these are people who are 15, 16 years old. Most of them were not seniors. In fact, some of them were high school freshmen. But they spoke with such passion, some of them choking back tears to try to express not only their fears, but what they had lost. And similarly, I think at the White House meeting, the ability to hear from young people really strikes me as what's different. It changes the conversation because you can say, oh, well, these young people don't have any really concrete ideas or better ideas. But I think that they are touching something in the American spirit and saying that we have to find a solution. So when you listen to what was being said, for example, at the White House meeting, which I think it certainly has its publicity angle, I don't think that's where you really get solutions. I think what you hear there is that this goes beyond schools, that people who are saying, my kid's walking home from school, or my kid's walking over to an AP program, or my kid's waiting at the bus stop, and there are just so many guns around. So how do we deal with that? How do you stop that? That's the challenge. But as someone said, we have tons of ideas for solutions. The American people, gun owners and non-gun owners, NRA and non-NRA, agree basically on background checks, on limiting weapons that can become weapons of mass destruction. People agree on arguments about gun safety and preparedness and waiting periods. These are all very concrete ideas that are there. On the mental health side, I think that woman who stood up and said very quickly, most people who have mental health issues are not the ones who are shooting up the place. And that is really a dodge from the difficult issue of dealing with the fact that we have a proliferation of guns, more guns than people in our country. It's crazy.
Kimberly, I'll give you a chance to remark on anything you want.
Thank you so much. You know, it's interesting when I listened today to the students expressing themselves so passionate and eloquent, saying that they wanted to do something about this, that it was the passion and cause of their life, that they weren't going to forget it so that students can go into school safe. We owe that to the children, the students of America, to make sure that when they go through the school doors in the morning and the bell rings to go sit and pay attention in class, that they're able to pay attention to the lesson and not worry about a gunman coming through the door to kill them. And I want to take a moment to honor the lives of those that were lost and those that gave their lives trying to save others. And in particular, yes, we've talked a lot about the coach who was incredible and all the people that showed incredible valor in the face of tremendous adversity. And instead of cowering in fear, they ran towards to try to save lives, like the junior ROTC members that were absolutely so incredible. Peter Wang, 15 years of age, Alana Petty, 14 years of age, and Martin Duque, also 14. Imagine being that young and having the presence of mind and selflessness to say that I'm going to stand in the way so that others may live. That, I think, is
remarkable training, too, from the ROTC for
absolutely. And imagine if all the students were equipped with that kind of training and that we gave them the means by which to protect themselves, and we actually made schools a place where people said, you know what, I'm not going to go there to commit an act of violence because it will not be allowed. I will not be able to permeate there and go and do something and commit these horrific acts because they are protected.
Yeah, you know what the media did about that? They blamed the ROTC.
They did?
That the killer was also trained.
Oh.
So they instead of seeing what Kimberly, acutely pointed out, that Peter Wang, who was West Point, I guess has admitted him and the three junior ROTC cadets, or maybe it was just Peter Wang, but three had died.
Well, he wanted to go to West Point.
Yeah, they gave him posthumous entrance into the academy. We actually have the sound from Andrew Pollock, who, as Jesse mentioned, daughter Meadow died last week on Wednesday, just a week ago today. Can we play that?
My daughter has no voice. She was murdered last week, and she was taken from us. Shot 9 times on the 3rd floor. I'm very angry that this happened, because it keeps happening. 9/11 happened once, and they fixed everything. How many schools, how many children have to get shot? It stops here with this administration and me. Should have been one school shooting, and we should have fixed it. And I'm pissed, because my daughter I'm not going to see again. She's not here. She's not here. I didn't think it was going to happen to me. If I knew that, I would have been at the school every day if I knew it was that dangerous. It's enough. Let's get together, work with the president, and fix the schools.
His passion is certainly evident, Jesse, but also to have the ability to come to the White House with your sons and to articulate yourself that well and say that you're committed to making sure it doesn't happen again. It was a very strong moment.
Very strong. He really lit a fire under the president. That was the moment, I think, of the entire event that people really began to think, this is never going to happen again. You can never listen to someone talk like that passionately and then forget it a few weeks later. Said something else pretty interesting to me. We protect everything we value in this country with guns. We protect banks. We protect politicians. We protect celebrities. We protect congressmen. Everything we value, we protect with guns. Why don't we protect our children with guns? And the 9/11 analogy is really critical. Every school shooting is a mini 9/11 for that school and for those families and those communities. And to have it happen over and over and over again, we've just reached critical mass in this country. I think this is going to be the moment.
What about that tipping point, Greg? Do you think culturally it is something where you'll see maybe it'll be difficult to get the legislation through, but it'll happen this year?
I don't know. I mean, we live in a strange time where the news is accelerated so quickly that there. I mean, I'm still like, we don't know what happened in Vegas. Like, this fiend was utterly preventable.
Yeah.
Obviously, we saw how many mistakes, but we still don't know anything about the Vegas thing.
And bump stocks are still okay.
Yeah, and the thing is, I don't think there was a possible way you could have stopped Vegas because we don't even know how long he planned. When somebody plans something, it's going to happen. 3 years. If somebody is smart and has a plan, look, I said this before, 9/11 was the second time, right? It was the second attack on the World Trade Center. Mm-hmm. They went back and they planned another. They tried it once and then they came back and they did it again. As long as there's evil in the world, there will be these incidents, and we can't expect them to disappear like that. However, I will say this: these practical solutions are actually practical. I heard emotion, but I also heard rationality.
Yeah.
It wasn't simply people shouting, "Do something,"
or ban guns.
Ban guns.
Yeah.
What you heard were people that were actually expressing practical, rational solutions to a problem, and that is already, in my mind, progress. And we're actually talking about it. And I would suggest that something like this, I haven't seen anything like this before, but a town hall like this, pertaining to other issues like this, where people are intimately involving the president, is an interesting thing and could be something that, again, I go back to Donald Trump. His presidency is a talk show. Maybe that's not so bad, because that's the talk show you need.
Well, see, I don't agree, because I think you're going to need to have some kind of resolution with the right-wing talk show host and the NRA, the people who will say, "You're taking away my guns."
Well, this goes back to the trust issue, which I think that
when you have
addresses.
a meeting like this, it's terrific in terms of having a cathartic moment. And I think for all of us as a country to hear the pain and the families, to understand, as we were saying, that this is like a 9/11. If it's your child, it's your family. That man standing up there saying he'll never see his daughter again. Why didn't we fix this? That's powerful stuff. But in terms of actually resolving it, I think you got to get people together who will say, "Let's knock heads, gentlemen or ladies. We're going to have to make a deal
Juan, I'm
here."
going to have to stop you there. We'll have more on the president's listening session on gun safety when the 5 returns. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This program, we actually have checkpoints. When a student walks in the door, we actually have metal detectors, and we actually have an X-ray machine that students put their bags through. And right after this incident happened, a parent who didn't so much agree with it at first sent me an email saying thank you, because now I see exactly what's happening. And so we oftentimes use that TSA model. When the student comes in, we have somebody at the door to greet them, to do a check-in just to see how they feel. And we have certain point people where I know this person's not feeling so well, so they won't get past point 1. They go through the metal detector. Their bag go through the machine. And so at the end of the day, just talking to my students right now today, they all say, well, I feel safe.
So that was Brandon Thompson, Greg. He's from Friendship Tech Prep, which is in Southeast D.C., and he was talking about how their school, they have had metal detectors for a long time. You don't have that all across the country, but yet another possible practical solution that was brought up.
Yeah, and it speaks to the idea of hardening soft targets as an industry. We have metal detectors at Fox, and they're metal detectors in you can't walk. I'm fairly certain you can't walk in with a weapon in Fox News.
Where do we have metal detectors?
I'm assuming we do. Maybe it's just for me. But anyway,
you get special pat
we have armed. Let me put it this way: we have armed security. This is not. This is a hard
Heavily
target.
armed
This is a hard target.
here.
It should be a $1 trillion industry, because powerful industries are hardening already. Why are not our public places like schools hardening? You have 3,000 people at a place. They deserve to be protected. And I think if it's metal detectors, I think if it's security, I think if it's concealed carry, all of that stuff, it's all about hardening soft targets. When that happens, however, another soft target will develop, because people will move to the easiest target. But then you just adapt and change.
Well, I think the softest target, someone said that you have to worry away from school. I mean, to me, the biggest danger for me with guns is that some gangbanger is going to shoot at somebody else. And
You're absolutely right.
Or hit my family.
More handgun deaths by far in a year than rifle. By far.
By far. Well, I don't know about,
7,000.
I don't know about the numbers on mass shooting, but I'm just saying on a personal
Oh, yes,
basis.
7,000 handgun
This
deaths.
is what scares me. And so when you hear people talk about this, you think, well, everybody's talking about, you know, what are we going to do? How are you going to harden me walking out the door
Well,
and going home?
you can't do everything, but I
Right,
think
so-
that one of the things that this gentleman, Jesse, was saying is that at their school, because they have this protection going into the school, and he said also that they check in with people if they think they're having one of those days and they're worried about it. But then at least it gives the comfort to the students so that they can actually do what they're supposed to be doing at school, which is to learn.
Right. So there's no silver bullet here, obviously. There's going to be a whole array of solutions. And like Greg said earlier, they're not going to completely ever prevent another shooting at a school. But in inner cities, you know, you have these big school buildings. Architecturally, there's usually 1 or 2 doors to go in and out. So those checkpoints make sense to put a metal detector in. In maybe a rural school or something in the middle of Florida, you have a sprawling campus with lots of different entrances and different buildings. That's not a solution there. Maybe a solution there is to have an armed security guard or an armed head coach, or to intervene. And I think the intervention thing here is the key, is this kid should have been flagged. In freshman year, he should have been flagged. I mean, if you're suspended that many times and you've had a mobile crisis unit called to the school to say this guy might hurt himself or somebody else, I don't know if he was suspended or expelled or transferred to another at-risk school. There's so many red flags here. You have to put it into a centralized database, and you have to make sure it gets into the FBI background check system, because this guy's threat matrix was through the roof. But honestly, the FBI dropped the ball twice on it.
All right.
That's
But number
a
one, what do
critical
you say
point.
number one, and this is something where Trump and I agree.
What's
Number
that?
one is that guy should not have been able to get a gun.
I
He was
agree.
too young.
No one
So
with that profile should ever been able to
Trump
get
is
an
looking
AR-15.
at age, and I'm all for
I
that.
think or get a gun.
What?
What about, forget an AR-15.
A handgun, well, you have to be 21 to get a handgun, but absolutely no AR. But you know what?
Right.
The AR, if you bump it up to age 21, the AR is a very popular weapon. It's used in rural communities for target, for big game, for small game, for sport, everything. And people like it because it's stylish, you can customize it, you can personalize it, and it's very accurate. If you ban an 18-year-old from getting an AR-15, what's going to stop him from going in with a shotgun or a long rifle? I mean, it's not a perfect solution, but I'm definitely open to the idea of raising the limit to 21.
I think the president has an idea here that I think is going to come to fruition, which is that kid shouldn't have had a gun. So what steps could we have taken to prevent that young man from legally obtaining a gun? Illegal guns, that's another issue, but let's just start with that.
That's number one.
We talked about this. It's the defensive position, which is how do you rig the system to keep the guns away, is wrong. The offensive strategy is to tag the perp so he doesn't get the gun. And that's where you look, where you have school officials, you have police, you have students. There's a database. There's a person there that's a problem. They go into the database. They don't get a gun. That's a defensive strategy that leaves law-abiding gun owners alone and goes after the felons and the sick.
Yeah, I'm all for that. But you know, a lot of people object. They say, why is my name being put in there? And so if
Well, there are going to be objections.
Yeah, if I go to a shrink or whatever.
Right. Kimberly, I wanted to ask you, just from a law enforcement standpoint, for the shooter, flagged several times, is there a point where you think, is it a federal law or is it state and local laws that would allow law enforcement to intervene earlier?
Well, I think you have to probably have both, as you see, because there has to be some control and autonomy at a local, a state level, local ordinances to make sure that they have the tools that they're equipped with. Look, I think there should be metal detectors at school. Why not? Look at the schools that have the metal detectors. I mean, this isn't that difficult to figure out. And it's not just about making sure that guns don't get in the wrong hands. It's about protecting the environment. It's about saying that how many times do you have to learn the same lesson over and over and over again? Schools are a target. Why? Because we have continued to allow them to be. We have not allowed the schools to equip themselves and protect the students. Why not? I can go and fly on a plane tonight and go through TSA and go through all kinds of stuff, but a child goes to school and there are no protections in so many places, and I think it's unacceptable, because believe me, if somebody is hell-bent on going in and killing and taking lives, they will find a way and a means to do it. And you can focus and get hypersensitive about the AR-15, or you can talk about how we can prevent this from happening in general, and it is really multifaceted in terms of the approach and the platform that is needed. So if you are just focusing on, oh, we need to ban guns, we need to do this, then you are really missing the large part of the problem here.
Greg, what about the possibility for technology to improve the ability to, we think of metal detectors as being quite clunky and difficult to get through, a lot of false positives, walking back and through it. It slows you down. Mm-hmm. That's why people say they don't want metal detectors at subway stops, because they don't want to be slowed down all the time. But is technology going to help us advance?
I don't know. I think technology, as it helps us advance, also hurts us. When drones are married to other kinds of agents, that is going to be an issue in the future, not simply just for the mass shooter aspect, but for terrorism in general. So I think that it's a double-edged sword, and that is no pun intended.
You know what I worry about those, so listen to Kimberly, movies. You don't go to the movies. You go to the basketball game, you go to the baseball. Everywhere now there's going to have to be magnetometers. And I just think we're making the whole society into an armory to get away from the fact that no one wants to say, hey, we got a problem with guns.
Well, it's part of it,
There's not a lot of shootings at NBA games. There's a lot of shootings at schools. So you prioritize where the metal detectors are.
I think Columbine happened at a school, but I also think we had Aurora with the shooting at a movie theater.
That's true.
Because
and I
those
think
are
we
soft
just had
targets
shooting
too.
at a concert in Las Vegas.
Right, but I think right now we're focused on schools.
Well, I'm just saying.
And
that's
at
one of the
the,
places
and at
where
the
we need a lot of
Bataclan
metal
in
detectors.
Paris. So
Right,
these
there's
are
a bigger
universal
problem
issues.
that people don't want to deal with.
What do you? I don't.
Okay, but I go
keep saying
down to
people
pay
don't want
a-
to deal with it. We just watch people dealing
You
with
go
it.
down to pay a parking ticket at court. You make there's
we'll have
security there.
many days ahead of us to talk about this. An extraordinary day where we watch the president do this amazing town hall on school shootings. That's it for us. Brett is up with much more reaction on the president's listening session on gun safety. Hi, Brett.